Domark's 007 reign continued on after their boat racing game of Live and Let Die, but now it was time to go back to a movie release tie-in, and it would be their third time doing so after A View to a Kill and The Living Daylights. Interestingly enough, their next game was actually released 2 months before the film was. At this point, the video game industry was once again going strong, with the Famicom and NES dominating the industry. The Sega Genesis was released in Japan shortly before in 1988, bringing them into the mix, and actually the Nintendo Game Boy would be released one day after Domark would release License to Kill on April 20th, 1989. License to Kill was the second and last Bond film to star Timothy Dalton, who brought a darker edge to the role. Because of this, License to Kill is known for being one of, if not the most violent of the Bond films. There's some brutal stuff for this series, with a man's legs being eaten by a shark, another man's head exploding in a pressure chamber, and another man falling into a giant shredder. Some time had to be cut to meet the rating guidelines, and it's almost as if audiences weren't ready for a Bond film like this, as it was the least profitable film in the franchise to date, adjusted for inflation. Originally titled License Revoked, it was later changed to License to Kill, as the term revoked tested poorly in American audiences, as they related it to losing a driver's license. This is also the first in the franchise to not be named after one of Ian Fleming's stories, although certain elements were used from his versions of Live and Let Die and the Hildebrand Rarity. The film License to Kill was released on June 13, 1989 in London, and it stars Timothy Dalton, Carey Lowell, Robert Davi, Talisa Soto, and an early role for rising star Benicio del Toro. In the film, Bond and CIA ally and friend Felix Leiter are busting drug lord Franz Sanchez prior to Felix's wedding. After he escapes, Sanchez murders Felix's wife and maims Felix by dumping him in a shark tank, and it's up to Bond to enact revenge for his friends. So how would Domark handle their next entry in the computer game line? License to Kill was developed by Quixel and was released for the widest variety of computers of any of their Bond games up to this point, with entries on the usual classics like the Commodore 64, the MSX, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, and BBC Micro, along with the newer 16-bit models that Live and Let Die was released for, the Amiga and the Atari ST. It was also released for DOS, which was strictly used for their 2 interactive fiction games in the past. It was even being planned to be released for the NES, but apparently they scrapped that idea since it was too far beyond the film's release to yield much of a profit. However, they would release it 7 years later one more time for the Sega Master System only in Korea in 1996. That's sort of a strange decision, but there were a lot of options back then to play this game. Let's check out the back of the box of the Spectrum version. He's big, he's back, he's James Bond 007, and now in a thrilling adaptation from the new movie License to Kill, you can take his place. License to Kill is a multi-level, multi-role game. You take controls of helicopters, boats, and tankers, perform some death-defying parachute stunts, and take to the seas for a spot of barefoot water skiing. A steady aim and steady fire is needed. Shoot from the hip and take out the baddies. It's action-packed and closely follows the latest adventures of the world's best-kept secret agent in the brand new and most exciting movie of them all, James Bond in License to Kill, appearing now on a small screen near you. So let's check out 007 License to Kill on the Commodore 64, as I've been doing. It sounds like it's back to being in the style of The Living Daylights. There are 6 missions this time, and they're once again trying to follow the story of the film. It's a nice change of pace from the one-note Live and Let Die game. So Mission 1 starts the game off with Bond in a helicopter chasing down Sanchez in a jeep. You are able to fly in all directions and shoot your gun forward. It's a lot like the arcade game 1942, which came out years prior. The screen will scroll forward until you reach the end, dodging buildings trying to shoot you down. It's a pretty self-explanatory and simple level, and not a bad start to the game, really. Mission 2 takes place in the same area, but now you control tiny Bond on the ground in the same vertical scrolling style. And honestly, this is where the game sorta started to lose me. You would think a run and gun would be a suitable change and, you know, what a Bond game typically is, but I couldn't grasp the controls. In order to record the proper footage, I did have on unlimited ammo and lives, but I did try the game without these perks too. You see, with like all the other Bond games on the Commodore, there's only a one-button joystick. Bond runs using the joystick, but aiming your gun is where it got really tricky and kinda hard to explain. You're supposed to press the button once to put Bond into sort of this aiming axis, and then you shoot in the direction. But man, it was easier said than done. And for some reason, if you were to run into an enemy at any point, you're forced to restart the level. I found this one very frustrating, and I only sorta got the point even after finishing it. So my viewpoint for describing these games is I think it's best to give a rundown of the first two levels and then only briefly discuss the rest of the games. Typically, the first two are where you learn the controls and how a game plays, so it seems like a good stopping point for describing it in detail. If you wish to see and complete the game for yourself, just be warned that I will be spoiling the rest of the game. But since there are only 6 levels, we're actually already 1/3 done with the entire game. What I find very interesting is that the first 3 levels, literally half of the game, all occur before the title sequence in the film. It's as if they had this huge epic game planned and then they just completely rushed it at the end. So Mission 3 deals with Felix flying the plane, attempting to lower Bond onto Sanchez's plane to hook the tail end with a tow rope, just like in the film. It's honestly very difficult to do, and it took me a while as I thought I was doing it wrong the whole time, and then it just kinda worked. Mission 4 is a water stage in which you must acquire a harpoon from a diver and then attach it to the plane flying up ahead. It's extremely short and it can be completed in less than a minute if you know what you're doing. Mission 5 is immediately after Mission 4 ends, and I easily spent the most time here. Bond is now water skiing and must dodge objects in the water to catch up to the plane. It's very difficult and I didn't know what to do for quite a while. I just kept skiing. Finally, we are all of a sudden at the climax of the film, and arguably the best scene in the movie, the oil tanker chase. Here, you have to land Bond on an oil tanker to take control of it, and then destroy jeeps and a few other tankers, and then you beat the game, and you get your fun end screen. So, there is License to Kill. I feel like we're now at a point where the Commodore versions are not the definitive versions of these games, as some of the higher power computers make the game look so much better. I did not try these out, however, since I'm utilizing the Commodore versions for as long as I can, as I find it easier to compare these games that way. But at least I can show how different each version looks at this point. As far as this version of the game goes, I didn't really care for it much. It's leagues better than Live and Let Die was, but I still prefer the Living Daylights to this. License to Kill is definitely trying to be more varied, and I can appreciate that. The levels blend together much better than A View to a Kill did, and maybe with some practice or a better control system, this wouldn't be a bad game at all. As far as an adaptation of the film, it's incredibly unbalanced though. As I said, half the game is the pre-title sequence, and then there's a couple water levels and you're all of a sudden at the end of the film. Since the game came out before the movie did, it's difficult to tell if the developers had a proper rundown of the film's plot or not. You never see Sanchez in the game, and you're constantly chasing down some sort of vehicle in 5 out of the 6 levels. Apparently this game does have its fans too, but I'm sure it's for the better systems. Perhaps one day I'll get to play some of these other versions, but for now the Commodore one is skippable in my opinion. What would be amazing is if they released all of these classic Bond games on some sort of anniversary collection with streamlined controls, but I know that will never happen. These games are largely forgotten nowadays, with the older computer games getting harder and harder to play. Emulators are available, and really that's the only way to play them unless you're a collector of vintage computers, and I am not. But now the 80s have ended, and it's time to usher in a new decade that will prove to be pivotal not only for Bond games, but the Bond franchise and gaming as a whole. The film franchise would go on a bit of a long 6-year hiatus at this point, and Timothy Dalton would no longer be returning as 007. But Domark isn't through yet. They would still be known under that name until being sold in 1996, but they still had 2 more entries in the Bond series. There seems to be a bit of a pattern here at this point, because next we'll once again be going back to an old film in the year 1990. Will it be better than Live and Let Die was? Are these classic computer games starting to feel a bit samey at this point? We'll find out next time. There were actually 2 Bond games released in 1990. Sort of, but we'll get to that. Thank you all once again for listening to my history rundown, and I greatly appreciate all the support I can get. Please be sure to like and subscribe in order to stay updated on continuing this retrospective, as it's still lots of fun to make, and I even learned quite a bit myself. James Bond will return in The Spy Who Loved Me.